The wind screams against the diner windows like something alive and furious. 3 in the morning. The checkered floor stretches out black and white and endless under fluorescent lights that hum with the sound of dying electricity. Mia Harper pushes the mop across the tiles, the motion mechanical, her hands cracked and red from 18-hour shifts that pay nothing. Nothing. Outside, Los Angeles disappears into a blizzard so thick you cannot see across the street. Snow piles against the windows like the city itself is being buried alive. Visibility near zero. Wind that cuts like a blade wrapped in ice. The door slams open. The sound is violent. Immediate. A child staggers through, maybe 6 years old, soaked through a pink nightgown torn at the shoulder. Her feet are bare. Barefoot in the freezing night. Her lips are blue. Deep, terrifying blue. Her small body shakes so violently her teeth chatter in a rhythm that sounds like breaking glass. She collapses. Mia does not think. Thought is a luxury she cannot afford. She moves. The mop drops. Her body moves toward the child like water finding its way downward, like something pulled by gravity and survival and the one thing she has left that matters. She gathers the girl into her arms. Sweetheart, sweetheart, I have you. You are safe. Mia's voice is barely steady, trembling like a candle in the wind, but she keeps speaking because sometimes sound is the only anchor a terrified child has. She wraps her winter coat, the only coat she owns, the only one, the single barrier between her ribs and the November cold, around the shaking girl. Around her shoulders. Around her legs. Around every part of her that trembles. The child's eyes are wide and dark and full of something Mia recognizes. Terror. Pure, animal terror. The kind that comes from running. From being hunted. Bad men, the girl whispers. Her voice is so small. So impossibly small. Bad men coming. They said bad words. They said they would hurt Daddy. Mia holds her tighter. She says nothing because there is nothing to say. She has $5 in her apron pocket. 5. She has a foreclosure notice in her locker for $35,000, a number so large it might as well be written in a language she does not speak. She has 7 days before everything she owns goes away. 7 days. And she has no idea who this child is. Outside, headlights cut through the blizzard like searchlights through fog. A black SUV idles across the street, engine running, windshield wipers working but useless against the snow. Inside, tinted windows hide everything and everyone. Inside that darkness, a man sits perfectly still. Nicholas Castellano. 43 years old but looking carved from something older, something harder. His shoulders fill the leather seat. His suit is charcoal gray, tailored to perfection, the kind of suit that costs more than Mia Harper makes in 6 months. Open at the collar, showing skin, showing the confidence of a man who has never needed to hide. His eyes are storm gray, intense in the way that suggests he is watching everything and everyone and cataloging weaknesses. On his left ring finger, a silver band. On his right wrist, a gold Rolex that could pay her foreclosure notice 3 times over. In his hand, a phone pressed to his ear. I found her, he says. His voice cracks. Cracks. In 15 years, his Lieutenant Sergio has never heard his voice crack. I found my daughter. Sergio stares. The man beside him, built like a tank, dressed in black, sits motionless. His jaw clenches. He looks at the diner. At the window. At the waitress wrapped around a child in a pink nightgown, wrapped around her like her body is a shield. Like she is willing to take bullets meant for a stranger. Boss, who is that woman? Sergio's voice is careful, measured. In his world, asking questions can be dangerous. But this question matters. Nicholas does not answer. He watches. His phone stays pressed to his ear, but he is not listening to whoever is on the other end. He is watching Mia Harper hold his daughter, Emma, the child he thought was gone forever. Taken. Dead, maybe. definitely dead until 2 hours ago when his network of informants whispered back through the darkness, "She is alive, she is running, she is scared." He had sent 2 men to extract her from the house where she was being held. But Emma panicked. Emma bolted. Emma ran into a blizzard that was swallowing the city whole. And a stranger in a diner with $5 in her pocket wrapped her own coat around her. Nicholas watches the waitress whisper something to Emma. The girl's body relaxes slightly. Not much. But slightly. Like the promise of warmth is enough to stop the shaking for just a moment. Something cold and dangerous stirs in his chest. Something he has not felt in years. Something he thought was dead. Mia holds Emma and feels the girl's heartbeat slow. Just a little. Just enough. The coat is wrapped around them both now, not nearly big enough for 2 people, but she pulls Emma closer anyway and lets the child bury her face in her shoulder. Outside, the wind screams. The snow falls. The world is ending in white and cold. But in this moment, in this diner with the dying neon lights and the smell of old coffee and grease, a 6-year-old girl feels safe for the first time in weeks. Mia does not know that the coat she just gave away would bind her to the most dangerous man in Los Angeles. She does not know that this child belongs to an empire built on loyalty and violence and the kind of power that reaches into every corner of the city. She does not know that her life is about to splinter into before and after, and there will be no going back to the way things were. She only knows that a child is shaking in her arms and the night is brutal and she will not let go. The black SUV sits idling across the street, engine running, headlights cutting through the white darkness. Nicholas Castellano leans back in the leather seat and closes his eyes. In 15 years, Marco and Enzo and Sergio and Gino and every man who has ever worked for him has never seen what they are about to see. They have never seen him move toward something tender. Toward something fragile. Toward something that could hurt him. But that is what is about to happen. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone you love and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Because what happens when a man who controls empires meets a woman who owns nothing is going to change both of them forever. Now, let us go back. Back to 3 years earlier. Back to a small apartment with cheap walls and a mattress on the floor. Back to the beginning, when Mia Harper still believed her life could be saved if she just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, endured enough. Back to the moment when everything started crumbling. The morning sun comes through the window and there is no heat in the apartment. No heat at all. Mia wakes at 5 in the morning because she always wakes at 5. The alarm is not necessary. Her body has learned the rhythm of survival. 5 a.m. Shower in cold water. 30 minutes to get ready for the morning shift at the grocery store. Then straight to the diner for the dinner rush. 18 hours if you count the drive time. She sits on the edge of the mattress and counts the money in her wallet. $13. 13. Rent is due in 4 days and she owes Cordelia Blackwood $800. $800 that she does not have. The woman who employs her as a live-in nanny for her 2 children pays her cash under the table, pays her almost nothing, and expects Mia to sleep in a converted closet and be grateful. Grateful. 3 years of waking before sunrise. 3 years of bathing children who will never call her mommy. 3 years of pouring her entire heart into a job that means she eats whatever scraps the family leaves on the table. And Douglas Hale. Douglas Hale is the reason she cannot sleep even when she is exhausted. He appears in her dreams. In the parking lot. Outside the diner. That look in his eyes that says he owns her. That says she made a mistake leaving him and now she will pay. The police will not help her. She has called 3 times. The officers who show up know Douglas. Work with Douglas. One of them even shook his hand and smiled at her like she was lying. She puts the $13 back in her wallet. She thinks about the foreclosure notice that arrived yesterday. $35,000. 7 days to pay or the apartment goes. The apartment that she cannot afford and cannot lose because sleeping on the street is not compatible with working 2 jobs and keeping herself clean enough to serve food and watch children. She puts on her uniform. Grey polyester. Name tag with her name printed in letters that are already fading. She looks at herself in the mirror and does not recognize the woman looking back. Outside, the Los Angeles morning is grey and cold. The storm will pass, and you are far stronger than you think. The morning Mia Harper walked through the iron gates of the Blackwood estate, she carried everything she owned in a canvas bag the color of old bone. 26 years old. 5'4". Dark hair pulled back so tight it made her scalp ache. Eyes that had learned not to hope. The gates closed behind her with a sound like a coffin lid sealing shut. The mansion rose before her like a cathedral built for worship of something money could buy. White columns. Marble foyer the size of her childhood home. A chandelier hung from the ceiling like frozen lightning, each crystal catching the morning sun and throwing it back in 1,000 directions. Mia stood still, trying not to drip on the floors. Cordelia Blackwood descended the curved staircase in a silk blouse the color of champagne and a diamond necklace that caught the light like a blade. 52 years old but carved from something harder than bone. Her smile was the smile of someone who had never needed anything she could not afford. She looked at Mia the way you look at a tool, with brief appraisal and no real interest. "You are the nanny," Cordelia said. "Not a question." "Yes. I'm so grateful for. The children need someone available at all hours. I trust you understand your place." Cordelia's heels clicked against marble as she walked. Mia followed. They descended a narrow staircase behind the kitchen. The air grew cooler. The light dimmed. At the bottom, a door opened onto a space that had once been a storage closet. 6 feet by 4 feet. A metal cot with a thin mattress. A single shelf. A small round window near the ceiling that looked out at ground level. You could see the feet of people walking past, nothing more. "You will sleep here," Cordelia said. "The children's rooms are upstairs. You will hear them if they need you. Breakfast is at 7. The children are 7, 9, and 4. Their names are Thomas, Claire, and Sophie. You will feed them, dress them, prepare them for school. You will pick them up at 3 o'clock. You will help with homework. You will prepare dinner. You will do bedtime routine. You will be available until 10 at night. Your salary is $200 per week, paid in cash every Sunday. Room and board are included. You will not eat with the family. You will eat in the kitchen after we have finished. Do you understand? $200 per week." Mia did the mathematics in her head. $800 per month. She thought about her childhood home, the small house her parents left her before they died in a car accident when she was 18. She thought about the predatory loan that had taken it. She thought about the letter that arrived last month saying she had until the end of the year to pay $35,000 or the house would be sold at auction. She thought about needing money more than she needed air. "I understand," Mia said. "Good. You start now." Sophie needs her breakfast. 3 years passed in the space of that converted closet. 3 years of waking before the sun touched the iron gates. 3 years of bathing children whose names felt too heavy for her mouth to say. She could not call them hers. She was just Mia. The nanny. The woman in the closet. She woke every morning at 5 o'clock. The window near the ceiling showed her the feet of the gardener walking past, the wheels of trash bins, the world above her head that she moved through but never truly inhabited. She dressed in the dark. She climbed the narrow stairs to the kitchen and began breakfast: oatmeal for Sophie, cereal for Claire, eggs for Thomas. Toast. Juicing cups with pictures of animals on them. By 6:30, the children wandered into the kitchen wearing clothes she had laid out the night before, their hair still tangled with sleep. Sophie was 4. She had golden hair and a gap in her smile where 2 bottom teeth had fallen out. Every morning she wrapped her arms around Mia's legs and pressed her face into her thigh. "Good morning, Mia," she said in a voice like wind chimes. It was the closest thing to love that Mia had learned to accept. "Good morning, sweet girl," Mia would say, and her voice would crack on the word sweet. School runs consumed her afternoons. Picking up Thomas at 3:15 and Claire at 3:45. Helping them with homework at the kitchen table while Sophie drew pictures with markers that smelled like fake fruit. History projects. Math worksheets. Reading assignments. Mia helped them build dioramas of ancient Egypt out of tissue paper and paint. She listened to Claire read aloud from chapter books, correcting her gently on the words she stumbled over. She helped Thomas with long division, showing him again and again how to break the numbers apart and rebuild them. At night, she did bedtime stories. Sophie wanted the same books every night, a story about a mouse looking for cheese, a story about a pig who made friends with a duck. Mia read them over and over until the words lost their meaning and became only sounds, a rhythm that carried the children down into sleep. She stood in the doorway of their rooms and watched them breathe. She thought about how they would grow up and forget her name. She thought about how this was all she was ever going to get. The Blackwood children called their mother Mummy. At school events, they would hold Cordelia's hand and say, "This is my mother," with a kind of pride that Mia recognized as the normal way children spoke about their parents. When they spoke of Mia, they said, "This is our nanny," or sometimes, "This is Mia." She stood in the background at parent-teacher conferences while Cordelia discussed her children's achievements. Thomas was advanced in mathematics. Claire had been selected for the gifted program. Sophie was well-behaved and made friends easily. The teachers never mentioned Mia. She was the person who prepared them, the infrastructure that kept them functioning, invisible as the pipes that carried water through the walls. In her closet at night, by lamplight, Mia counted money. $78 after 3 years. $78 from $200 per week, saved by eating the scraps that the family left on their plates, by wearing the same clothes until they fell apart, by needing almost nothing because having almost nothing was what she had practiced her entire life. She kept the $78 in a tin box that had once held biscuits. She kept it under her cot. Sometimes she took it out just to count it again, as if the numbers might have multiplied in the darkness. As if hope could be measured in crumpled bills. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday. It was in an envelope with her name printed in official lettering. $35,000. 7 days to pay or the house would be seized and auctioned. 7 days. The number was impossible. The number was a death sentence delivered with proper postage. That night, Mia sat on her cot and cried. She cried without making sound because the children slept upstairs and she did not want anyone to hear her falling apart. She cried the way people cry when they understand they're going to lose everything. The tears came from somewhere so deep inside her that she wondered if she had ever been anything but a person about to lose. Cordelia found her the next morning. She was walking past the open closet door, and she saw Mia sitting on the cot, the foreclosure notice in her hands. Cordelia stopped. She read the words from a distance. And then she smiled. "Perhaps you should have made better choices," Cordelia said, and her voice was gentle, which was worse than if she had been cruel. Gentleness implied that everything that had happened to Mia was deserved. That poverty was a personal failing. That if she had just been smarter, stronger, less broken, she would not be sitting on a cot in a converted closet holding a piece of paper that said she was about to lose the last thing her parents had given her. Cordelia walked away. Her heels clicked against the tiles of the kitchen. They clicked against the marble foyer. They climbed the curved staircase and disappeared into the upper rooms of a house that Mia would never truly live in. 3 blocks away, in a small office above a security company, Douglas Hale was receiving a phone call. Cordelia Blackwood's voice on the other end was like honey poured over broken glass. "She will be vulnerable soon," Cordelia said. "Very vulnerable. And I want her to understand that there is nowhere safe to go." Douglas listened. In the silence between Cordelia's words, something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest, the kind of certainty that comes when you know someone has finally given you permission to do what you have wanted to do all along. 2 weeks before the blizzard that would change everything, Nicholas Castellano sat in his downtown Los Angeles penthouse office and held a pair of tiny white shoes with pink bows. The shoes had never been worn. They were from a store he'd walked into after Emma was born, and he'd bought them that day knowing she would grow into them, knowing he would be there to watch her feet grow, to tie the laces, to carry her on his shoulders through a life he would protect with every breath in his body. He held them now because his daughter was missing, and these shoes were all he had left that still smelled like her. The office around him was all glass and steel, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that bent to his will. 43 stories above the streets. Cigar smoke curled in the still air like a ghost refusing to leave. His phone sat on the desk, and the silence between rings was a kind of torture he had never imagined. The door opened. Sergio entered first, then Gino. Both men had been with him for 15 years. Both men had watched him build an empire that stretched across every corner of Los Angeles, shipping routes, protection networks, casinos hidden behind borrowed names. They had seen him negotiate with federal prosecutors, with rival families, with men who would kill for the power he carried in his suit pocket like a loaded gun. But they had never seen him like this. Still nothing, Sergio said quietly, standing at a distance because proximity felt wrong when the boss looked like this. We've checked every shelter within 30 miles. Every hospital. Every group home in the county. Nicholas didn't respond. His hands trembled as he turned the shoes over and over, the way a man might turn a rosary bead, praying to a God he'd stopped believing in years ago. Emma was 6 years old. She had his dark eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. She was afraid of the dark and loved to sing songs off-key and asked him why the sky was blue and why people had to die. He had told her that sometimes people made choices, and those choices had consequences that rippled outward like stones thrown into water, breaking the surface, destroying the reflection. He had never expected those choices to take her from him. How many men? Nicholas asked. 200, Gino said. Searching methodically, grid by grid. We've got contacts at every bus station, every airport, every border crossing. If she's moving, we'll find her. She's 6 years old, Nicholas said, and his voice was steady in a way that made both men understand the danger they were standing near. She doesn't move anywhere. Someone took her. Someone is hiding her. And you're telling me that with 200 men and all the resources we have, she's still missing. He stood. The shoes fell to the floor. Neither man bent to pick them up. Find her, Nicholas said. I don't care who you have to break or what you have to burn. Find her. But while 200 men were tearing through Los Angeles looking for a small girl with dark eyes and a fear of the dark, 6 blocks away in a group home on 7th Street, Emma Castellano was already running. She had been asleep in a room with 3 other children when the man came through the window. He didn't speak. He simply lifted her out of bed and carried her through the dark, and Emma's scream died in her throat because she had learned, in the 6 years of her life, that screaming didn't help. Her mother had screamed too, during the car accident, and the screaming hadn't stopped the telephone pole from breaking through the windshield. The screaming hadn't brought her father. So she didn't scream. She just closed her eyes and tried to remember the smell of her father's office, the smell of cigars and leather, the smell of the one place that had felt like safety. The man carried her through the rain. It was November. The rain fell like something angry, like something trying to wash the city clean. They got into a car, and the car drove, and Emma sat in the back seat and watched the rain streak the windows. She counted the streetlights. She counted them until her eyes closed and she fell asleep to the sound of the engine and the storm. Hours later, there was shouting. The car stopped. The man dragged her out into an alley where the rain came down in sheets and the wind cut through her thin nightgown like a blade. More men appeared. They were chasing the man who had taken her. She ran. She didn't know which direction was safe, so she just ran, her bare feet on wet pavement, her breath coming in gasps that the cold air made visible, little clouds of fear disappearing into the night. She saw a light ahead. A diner. It was the only light for miles, glowing yellow and warm against the November darkness. She pushed through the door, and the heat hit her like a physical thing, and she understood for the first time that her body could feel something other than cold and fear. Inside, there was a woman standing behind the counter. The woman had dark hair tied back in a braid and exhaustion written across her face like a map of a country that had been through war. She wore a uniform 2 sizes too big, and her hands were red from washing dishes. She was approximately 28 years old but looked like a person who had lived through decades of things that should have destroyed her. What Mia Harper noticed first, though, was the child. The child was shaking. The child was soaked through with rain and desperation and terror in a way that made everything else, the foreclosure notice in her pocket, the $5 to her name, the man she knew was coming for her, the life she had lost, disappear into insignificance. Mia didn't think. She never thought when children were involved. She had been a nanny for 3 years, sleeping in a converted closet, watching other people's children grow up and flourish and move through the world like they belonged to someone. She had learned that children were the only truly honest things left in the world. They didn't lie about their feelings. They didn't pretend. They just existed, raw and real and deserving of a version of protection that no adult had ever offered to Mia herself. She pulled off her coat. It was the only decent piece of clothing she owned. It was navy blue and had been her mother's before her mother died. It had buttons of real mother-of-pearl. She wrapped it around Emma, and Emma stopped shaking long enough to look up at her with eyes that were older than 6 years old. "You're safe," Mia said, and she meant it, though she had no idea how she would keep that promise. The sound came before the arrival, the sound of engines, multiple vehicles, stopping outside the diner. Mia pulled Emma behind the counter and crouched down, her own heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. Men in suits that cost more than everything she owned entered the diner like they owned the building, like they owned the night itself. The first man was tall, 6'2" at least, with shoulders that filled the space like he was larger than the laws of physics. He wore a black cashmere coat that fell to his knees, and it was dusted with snow. His hair was dark, slicked back from a face that was all sharp angles and barely contained rage. But his eyes stopped her. They were storm gray, and they were looking at the counter where she crouched, and they were looking at her with an intensity that made her understand she was about to be either saved or destroyed, and she wouldn't know which until he decided. "Nicholas," one of the men said. "We've got movement 2 blocks north." "Could be nothing, but—" "Quiet," Nicholas Castellano said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. "Tell me why my daughter is behind that counter instead of with her family." Mia stood. She kept her body between the counter and where Emma crouched, wrapped in the navy coat. "She came in running. I don't know who she is. I just know she was cold." Nicholas stepped forward. The 2 men flanking him, one with a scar running from his eye to his jaw, one with hands that looked like they had broken 1,000 promises, stepped forward with him, but Nicholas raised a hand and they stopped. "You gave her your coat," he said, and it wasn't a question. "She was freezing," Mia replied. "You don't know who she is, and you still gave her your coat." Mia didn't answer. She was calculating. She understood that this man was dangerous the way a person understands that a storm is dangerous, not because anyone told her, but because the air itself changed when he entered a room. Nicholas kneeled. The action shocked his men. Sergio, the scarred one, exchanged a look with Gino that said in 15 years, I have never seen him do this. Emma made a sound like a bird whose wing was broken, and she moved out from behind the counter and ran directly at Nicholas, and he caught her, and his shoulders shook, and both Sergio and Gino understood in that moment that this man had been breaking since the child disappeared, and the breaking had finally reached a point where it could show itself. He held Emma for a long time. She was sobbing. He was silent. When he finally stood, he was holding her against his chest like she might dissolve if he loosened his grip even slightly. "What's your name?" he asked Mia. "Mia Harper." "Mia Harper, you saved my daughter's life tonight. I want you to know that I will remember this. I will remember you." Mia said nothing. She was thinking about the foreclosure notice in her locker in the back. She was thinking about the $5 in her wallet. She was thinking about a man who probably wanted her dead, who had been coming for her for 3 years, who had promised that she would suffer. Nicholas reached into his coat and produced a business card. He set it on the counter with fingers that were completely steady now. "If you ever need anything. Anything at all. You call this number." "I don't need anything from you," Mia said. Nicholas studied her, the way her hands were still shaking, the way her uniform hung off a frame that hadn't eaten properly in weeks, the way she had still put herself between danger and a child who meant nothing to her. "Keep the coat," he said. "I'll send her another." He walked toward the door, his men creating a path before him like water parting before a blade. But before he stepped into the November night, he turned back. The man who was chasing her. Describe him. Mia described him. Sergio and Gino exchanged a look. By the time Nicholas reached his car, 17 men were already being redirected to the location she'd given. The man would be found. The man would be brought to a warehouse. The man would learn what it meant to threaten the daughter of Nicholas Castellano. But that was a story for another night. What mattered tonight was that Emma was safe. What mattered was that a woman named Mia Harper had given her coat to a freezing child without hesitation and without expectation of reward. And what mattered most of all was that Nicholas Castellano did not forget people like that. 2 days later, a package arrived at the Blackwood estate. It contained a winter coat, expensive, tailored, worth more than Mia's monthly salary, and a single card that read, "*Thank you. N.C. Cordelia Blackwood intercepted the package in the foyer. She read the card. Her face went white. She stood there, holding the coat, understanding exactly what it meant that her little nanny had caught the attention of Nicholas Castellano. That night, she made a phone call. "Douglas," she said, her voice like honey poured over broken glass. "I need you to remind someone of her place. I need you to make her understand that there are consequences for becoming visible to the wrong people." The man on the other end of the line, a man with a criminal record and a vendetta and hands that had never learned to be gentle, he laughed. "I've been waiting for permission," Douglas Hale said. "I've been waiting for so long." The line went dead. And somewhere in Los Angeles, a woman named Mia Harper was about to understand that the $5 in her pocket and the foreclosure notice waiting for her was about to become the least of her problems. Because 2 of the most dangerous people she had ever encountered had just decided, in the span of a single phone call, that her life was about to end. But she didn't know that yet. She was still holding the navy coat. She was still smelling the perfume of a child she had held for only a few minutes. She was still believing that some small corner of the world was still just and kind. She was still believing in the possibility of safety. The supply closet smelled like bleach and laundry detergent, a sharp chemical bite that burned the back of her throat. A single fluorescent bulb flickered overhead, casting everything in sickly white light that made shadows dance across the metal shelves stacked with towels and cleaning supplies. Outside, through the thin walls, children's laughter echoed from the main room of the shelter. That sound that had kept Mia alive for the past 3 weeks, that small evidence that joy still existed somewhere in this fractured world. The door slammed open. Douglas Hale stood in the doorway, his body filling the frame, his breath coming in hard gasps like he had been running. His eyes, pale blue and utterly devoid of anything resembling mercy, locked onto hers. He wore a jacket stained at the collar, jeans that smelled of cigarette smoke and something darker, something metallic. His hands trembled with a rage so visible it seemed to vibrate in the air between them. "You embarrass me," he said, his voice low and grinding like gravel under a tire. "In front of those men. Do you understand what you did?" Mia's back pressed against the wall. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her thin jacket, not the navy coat Nicholas had sent, which she kept wrapped in tissue paper in her locker like a prayer, like a promise of a life that might have been. This jacket was the one from 3 years ago, worn through at the elbows, the zipper broken. "I didn't do anything to you, Douglas. Didn't do anything." He laughed, and the sound was like broken glass in a blender. "You made me look small. You walked into that restaurant like you belonged there. Like you were somebody." His right hand came up slowly. The gun gleamed in the fluorescent light, small, dark, impossibly heavy-looking even from a distance. A .38 revolver. Mia had seen guns before, had grown up in a neighborhood where they were as common as car horns, but she had never had one pointed at her ribs until the night Douglas first came back into her life. "You're nothing," he whispered, pressing the barrel against her body just below her left breast. "You've always been nothing. A maid. A servant. A woman so worthless that nobody even remembers your name after you clean their house." Mia's hands shook. Her vision blurred at the edges. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to run, to scream, to fight. But something else rose up in her chest, something that had been buried so deep she had almost forgotten it existed. It rose like a blade through water, cold and sharp and final. "Go ahead," she whispered. Douglas's finger tightened on the trigger. The door exploded inward. Nicholas Castellano stood in the frame, and the world seemed to stop. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than Mia's annual salary, an open white shirt showing the hard line of his collarbone, his dark hair swept back from a face carved from granite and fury. Behind him, Sergio moved left, Gino moved right, the two men sliding into position with the precise choreography of people who had done this 1,000 times before. "Put the gun down," Nicholas said, and his voice was so quiet it seemed to swallow all the other sound in the room. The fluorescent light above flickered and died, leaving only shadow. Douglas spun, bringing the gun up toward Nicholas in a movement that was far too slow, far too desperate. In that half-second of exposure, Gino moved like he was liquid. His hand came up and out, striking Douglas's wrist with enough force to crack bone. The gun flew from Douglas's grip and skittered across the tile floor. Douglas screamed, a high, animal sound, as Gino grabbed his jacket and slammed him face-first into the metal shelving unit. Bottles of disinfectant tumbled down around him. Blood poured from his nose, mixing with the bleach smell until the closet reeked of violence and chemistry. Nicholas stepped over Douglas's broken form without looking at him. He crossed the small space between himself and Mia in 2 strides. His hands came up, and for a moment she thought he might grab her, might shake her, might demand to know why she had not called him, why she had not run, why she had stood there in a supply closet with a madman and accepted her own death like a tired prayer. Instead, he took her face in his palms. His hands were warm. His thumbs brushed away tears she did not remember shedding. "Are you hurt?" His voice, when he spoke to her, was different. Not the voice he used to his men. Not the voice of the man who commanded empires. Something gentler. Something that sounded like it had cost him everything to produce. She shook her head. Could not speak. "You're safe now," he said. "I have you. You are not alone anymore." He drew her against his chest, and she could feel his heart slamming beneath the expensive fabric, could feel the violence contained in his body, the carefully controlled fury that had brought him here in the darkness before dawn. Over his shoulder, she saw Sergio emerging from the closet with Douglas in handcuffs, the man's face already swelling, his breath coming in ragged sobs. That night, after the police had come and gone, after the shelter director had closed the gates and the children were sleeping in their cots, Mia sat on a bench outside in the freezing rain. The November cold tore through Los Angeles like a blade wrapped in ice. Her car, repossessed that morning by a company that cared nothing for her circumstances, nothing for the $78 she had needed for gas and groceries, was already gone from the lot. The foreclosure notice was final now. 24 hours until the bank took her parents' house, the place where she had learned to read, where her mother had braided her hair, where she had buried a baby sister in the backyard in a showbox and said words she had heard at church. 24 hours until that memory became the property of strangers. The rain soaked through her thin jacket. Her hands shook so violently she could barely hold the $5 bill, all the money left in the world that belonged to her, without dropping it onto the wet concrete where it would dissolve into pulp and become nothing at all, which is what she felt like now. Nothing. A ghost haunting her own life. She thought about walking. Not toward the shelter. Toward the ocean. Just walking into the water and letting it fill her lungs and decide for her, since she no longer had the strength to decide anything herself. The children she had raised for 3 years, Emma, Lucas, the twins, they had already forgotten her. They called another woman Mummy now. The man who promised to love her had put a gun to her ribs. The house where her parents had read her bedtime stories would belong to people who would tear down the rosebushes and build a swimming pool and never know about the girl who grew up in those rooms, who left pieces of her heart in every corner. What was the point of continuing? What was the point of a life where she had nothing and no one had anything for her except violence and erasure? She stood. The bench was cold beneath her. The rain fell in sheets now, heavy and indifferent. 1 foot in front of the other. That was all it would take. 1 foot in front of the other until the water was deep enough, until the cold became numbness, until she finally stopped hurting. Then her hand found her pocket. Found the small pair of shoes, Emma's first pair, size 3, with tiny white socks still tucked inside them. Nicholas had left them behind at the diner by accident that night, and Mia had picked them up and kept them, meant to return them, but had never managed to let them go. She pulled them out now, held them in her shaking hands. They were so small. So impossibly small. And inside her chest, something that had been shattered began to refuse to stay shattered. Not completely. Not yet. She sat back down on the bench. The rain continued to fall. But she did not walk toward the ocean. At exactly 4:17 in the morning, 12 men in black moved through the pre-dawn darkness like ghosts. They arrived at Douglas Hale's apartment in a converted warehouse downtown, the kind of place that catered to men with secrets. Sergio kicked the door in with a force that sent it flying off its hinges. It crashed to the floor with a sound like a gunshot. Douglas woke screaming. He lay in a bed that cost $2,000, sheets that were Egyptian cotton, and found himself surrounded by men whose faces he could not quite make out in the darkness. His hands came up automatically, his mouth opening, sounds pouring out that were not quite words. "Please, please, I didn't mean it, I won't touch her again, I swear to God, I swear I'll never." Nicholas stepped into the room. The darkness seemed to part for him, seemed to make way. He was still wearing the charcoal suit. His hands were empty. His face was a mask of controlled fury that was somehow more terrifying than any weapon. "You put a gun to her ribs," Nicholas said, each word placed with precision. "You made her afraid to live. She stood in the rain last night and thought about walking into the ocean. She stood there and decided that death was better than continuing. Do you understand what you took from her?" I'm sorry, I didn't know, please, I'm sorry." Douglas collapsed to his knees, his body heaving with sobs. His face was already bruised from the supply closet. His hands shook so badly they barely supported him. In that moment, he looked like what he actually was, not a dangerous man, but a small, terrified creature that had never learned to be anything else. Nicholas made a phone call. "He's ready," he said into the phone. The call lasted 3 seconds. The rival family arrived in a black SUV. They did not have business with Nicholas Castellano, not officially. But what he wanted, they would provide, because the balance of power in Los Angeles was a carefully maintained equation, and Nicholas Castellano had kept that equation stable for 15 years. One body more or less was a small price for that stability. Douglas screamed as they dragged him toward the van. His hands clawed at the doorframe, leaving bloody streaks. His voice broke into sounds that were barely human anymore. "Where are you taking me? Where are you taking me? Please, somebody help me, please." The doors of the van closed. The engine started. The vehicle pulled into the frozen night and disappeared into the network of streets that would take it to a place from which people did not return. Douglas Hale was never seen again. The police would file missing person reports. The detectives would go through the motions. But everyone who mattered knew the truth, that some debts are paid in ways that never appear in any official record. At that same hour, Cordelia Blackwood was standing in a ballroom on the 40th floor of a downtown hotel, surrounded by Los Angeles elite. She wore a dress that cost $8,000, diamonds at her throat that had been mined from African conflicts, her hair arranged in a style that required 3 hours of preparation. She was smiling. She was in her element, powerful, untouchable, surrounded by people who feared her influence and her money and her complete absence of conscience. A hotel employee approached her with an envelope on a silver platter. "A delivery for you, Mrs. Blackwood," the young woman said. Cordelia opened it without thinking. Inside were financial records, statements, proof. Her smile froze. Within minutes, every screen in the ballroom displayed the same information. Cordelia Blackwood had been embezzling from her own children's trust funds for 8 years. $4,700,000 funneled into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, in Switzerland, in places where money could disappear and become invisible. The children she had raised, the Blackwood heirs who trusted her completely, had been funding her lifestyle while they themselves lived on allowances. The FBI arrived like a storm. Agents in dark jackets moved through the crowd with the precision of people who had practiced this exact moment 1,000 times before. Cordelia's face went white. Then red. Then something worse, the color of complete and absolute loss. "Cordelia Blackwood," an agent said, his voice flat and final. "This is absurd. I am Cordelia Blackwood. My family has been in this city for..." The cuffs went on her wrists. Cold metal against her skin. The same moment when everything she had constructed collapsed into ruin. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit violence," the agent said. His voice was loud enough that everyone in the ballroom could hear. "You have the right to remain silent." Cordelia screamed. She thrashed. Her carefully constructed image shattered like glass on marble. The cameras flashed. Her face, twisted in rage and terror, was captured 1,000 times over. By morning, she was on every news channel in California. The trial lasted 6 months. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. 40 years in federal prison. Her reputation obliterated. Her wealth seized. Her power, which had always been built on fear and silence and the willingness of people like Mia to accept their own invisibility, was gone. Cordelia Blackwood, at age 58, would spend the rest of her life in a cell 12 feet by 7 feet, with no staff, no influence, no way to hurt anyone ever again. The rain that fell that night seemed to wash something clean from the city. The house was exactly as she remembered it. Paint peeling from the shutters in long strips like shed skin. The porch step still creaked on the 3rd board. Mia Harper stood outside the home where she had learned to tie her shoes, where her mother had braided her hair on Sunday mornings, where everything good in her life had begun before everything fell apart. The envelope in her hands was cream-colored, expensive, the kind of paper that cost more than she usually spent on groceries in a month. Inside, the deed. Her name printed in official letters. Mia Elena Harper. Owner. Free and clear. No mortgage payments. No foreclosure notice. No 7-day deadline hanging over her like a blade wrapped in ice. Her hand shook so badly she almost dropped it. She walked through the front door and the smell hit her first, dust and memory, old wood and the ghost of her mother's perfume still lingering in the walls after all these years. The living room was exactly the size she remembered. Smaller, somehow. As if she had grown and the house had shrunk. But it was hers. She sank onto the hardwood floor of her childhood bedroom and let the tears come. Not the quick, hurried tears of someone afraid of being seen crying. These were the deep, ancient tears of someone finally safe enough to break. She held the deed against her chest and wept until her body had nothing left to give. 3 months had passed since that freezing night in the diner. Since Douglas Hale had arrived with his gun and his rage. Since Nicholas Castellano had appeared like vengeance given form, and everything she thought she understood about survival had been rewritten. She didn't know how long Nicholas had been protecting her. The job offer had arrived 2 weeks after the night at the diner, a director position at a non-profit called Mercy House, focused on helping children from broken homes. The salary was $75,000 a year. She had stared at the offer letter for an hour, terrified it was a mistake. that they would call back and say they meant someone else. They never called back. The first 6 months of rent had been paid in advance. She discovered this when she tried to pay the landlord and he looked at her confused, told her everything was handled. She never learned who paid it. She knew, though. The same way you know the difference between accident and intention. Sergio had appeared at the shelter one afternoon. Just appeared, moving through the hallways like he belonged there, which meant everyone assumed he did. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair and a gentleness in his eyes that contradicted everything about his presence. He watched Mia work with the children for an hour. Not speaking. Just observing. "The boss wanted you to know you're safe," he said finally, and then he left. She never saw him again. But after that, when Douglas's former associates came sniffing around, when they drove past the shelter at night, when they tried to follow her home, something always happened. A traffic accident that blocked the street. A sudden police presence. A sense that eyes far more powerful than theirs were watching. The protection was invisible. Perfect. Complete. Mia got to work. She painted the house pale blue, the color of sky on a clear day. She planted tomatoes in the backyard and bought a wooden bench from a second-hand store, one that didn't wobble. She learned the names of all her neighbors. Mrs. Chen, who lived next door and brought over soup. Marcus, who helped her fix the porch step. She volunteered at the shelter 3 nights a week and eventually the job offer became permanent. Director of Mercy House. She had a title. She had a future. She had a home. For months after the diner, Nicholas asked to meet her there. She almost said no. The thought of being in that space with him, where it had all started, where she had been desperate and he had been powerful and everything between them was in balance, it terrified her. But something in her said yes anyway. The diner looked exactly the same. Same checkered floor in black and white. Same neon signs humming their tired song. Same booth where she had wrapped her coat around a terrified girl. Nicholas was waiting. Emma sat beside him, and she was wearing the coat. The old grey coat that had belonged to Mia, the one she had given away without hesitation because a child's life mattered more than fabric and warmth. She insisted on keeping it, Nicholas said quietly, watching Emma play with the salt and pepper shakers. Every night, she wraps it around herself before bed. "It smells like you." Emma looked up. "You came," she said, as if Mia might not have. Mia sat down and the little girl launched herself into her arms. Emma was bigger now. Stronger. Less afraid. "You saved me," Emma whispered into her shoulder. "You saved me too," Mia whispered back. They stayed in the diner for 3 hours. The waitress, a young woman with tired eyes who Mia recognized from her own shifts here, kept refilling their coffee and brought Emma hot chocolate with whipped cream. Nicholas ordered pie and didn't touch it. He talked instead. He told her about his brother. About the choice that had broken something inside him that had never fully healed. About the guilt that lived in his chest like a second heart, beating alongside the first, keeping time with his breath. His brother had been like copper in a wound, turning everything poisonous. His brother had chosen greed over family, betrayal over loyalty. And Nicholas had chosen to do what needed to be done. "I thought I was drowning," Nicholas said, his voice steady but his eyes holding something raw. "After he was gone. After everything that happened. I thought I would spend the rest of my life in the dark. But then you came into that kitchen. You didn't know who Emma was. You didn't know what protecting her would cost you. And you did it anyway." Mia's hands wrapped around her coffee cup. The warmth felt necessary. "You were never invisible," he continued. "Not to me. Not from that first moment. When I found you in the kitchen with my daughter, wrapped around her like you were trying to shield her from the whole world, I saw you. I couldn't stop seeing you." He paused. Emma had fallen asleep, her head against his arm, her small hand gripping the edge of the grey coat. "You rebuilt your life," Nicholas said quietly. "Piece by piece. You didn't wait for permission. You didn't wait for rescue. You stood up, and you became someone. And that's when I knew it wasn't about debt anymore. I didn't want to owe you something. I wanted to know you. All of you. Mia looked at this man across the table. This man who commanded fear across an entire city, who made people disappear with a phone call, who had grown up in a world where violence was currency. He was vulnerable now. Raw. Honest in a way that cost him something. I'm not part of your world, she said slowly. You're not part of mine either, Nicholas replied. Maybe that's the point. Maybe two people from different worlds don't have to stay in their separate places. Maybe they can build something in between. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of possibility. Full of the weight of what they were both considering. 6 months later, Mia's house was filled with light and laughter. She had cooked dinner for 8 people. Nicholas sat at her kitchen table, sleeves rolled up, washing dishes with Sergio while Gino and 2 volunteers from the shelter set the table outside. Emma played in the yard with 3 other children, kids who had nobody, kids who were learning that they could belong somewhere. Never thought I'd see you doing dishes, Sergio said, watching Nicholas work. Nicholas smiled at Mia. There's a lot you've never seen. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and lemon. Like home. Like something real. Later, after the children had eaten and the volunteers had left, after Emma was playing in the living room with a picture book, Nicholas found Mia holding something small. Tiny shoes. Size 4. Shoes Emma had worn during her first week at the shelter, before Mia wrapped her in a grey coat and changed everything. I kept them, Mia said softly. I don't know why. Something in me knew I needed to keep them. Nicholas moved closer. The night you saved her, you saved me too, he said quietly. I was drowning in guilt. I was so full of rage that I couldn't see anything else. You reminded me what mattered. You showed me that one person's courage could rewrite a story that seemed written in stone. Mia set down the shoes and turned to face him. She took his hand. His fingers were warm. His palm was calloused. He was real. We saved each other, she said. Emma ran up, breathless with the excitement of childhood. Can we stay for stories? Of course, Mia said. Emma hugged her. Not carefully. Not afraid she would disappear. With the absolute confidence of a child who knew she belonged somewhere. They stood on the porch as the sun fell toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Nicholas looked at the street below, at the city that had taught him to survive, at the world he had built from pain and necessity. I never thought I'd have this, he said. Peace. Neither did I, Mia replied. She thought back to that freezing night, to the $5 in her pocket, to the coat she had given away without thinking about the cost. The smallest act of kindness. The simplest choice. It had changed everything. Your circumstances don't define your worth. Your kindness does. And when the right person sees you are not for what you have, but for who you are, everything becomes possible. Mia Harper was invisible once. Powerless once. Trapped once. But she protected a child without asking for anything in return. That single moment of courage set her free. Set all of them free. If this story moved you, like this video and share it with someone who needs hope. Subscribe so you never miss the stories that prove kindness is never wasted. Leave a comment telling us what you would have done in Mia's position. We'll see you in the next one. Remember this, the storm will pass, and you are far stronger than you think.